Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, professor, researcher, and big fan of educators everywhere. And with me is my lovely co-host,
Laura Estes Swilly. I am an educator and a writer, and also a really big fan of teachers everywhere in my building and beyond.
in all the buildings.
All the buildings.
All the buildings everywhere. And we have the best story. This is one of my favorite stories from the whole Lessons That Last collection. This is James' story about Coach Waite, and it's his story of redemption and second chances. And I love stories like that. So, Laura, was there a teacher or a coach or a mentor or anyone who gave you a second chance?
I think that I've probably gotten more second chances in my life than most people. And this story about Coach Waite just touches my heart because I never had a coach. I was never on a team of any kind other than in a play, and that functions as a team, or in the workplace on a team. But as far as everyone just like digging in, working toward the same goal, practicing, and the passion that goes into sports, I never was involved in that. So I'm jealous that I didn't have a coach who cared about me like this young athlete did, and like so many athletes I know, my husband included. When he talks about his coaches, he gets that little, and I feel like I missed something. But as far as second chances, I don't know. Am I wrong, Julie, or isn't life a series of second chances, and that's how we grow?
So I was thinking about this as we prepared for this podcast episode and this particular story. And I don't know that I was, like as a high school kid, in need of redemption or second chances like James. And as a teacher, my kids were kindergarten through second grade. I mean, of course, they got all the chances because they were babies. I kept thinking about being a new teacher, like a brand new teacher, and all the chances I got because I screwed up in every possible way. And I was remembering this one particular time when, I got hired out of internship in November as a fall intern and took over this kindergarten class full of interesting personalities in December. And their teacher had taken a mental health leave. They were truly the island of misfit toys. Oh, but I loved them so incredibly much. And I didn't know any better, right? So we were all happy together. And I remember one particular day we were leaving the lunchroom and the fire alarm went off and everyone had to evacuate the lunchroom and the whole entire school. And I got called into the office after school by Susan Stevens, who is my principal and was a dealer in second chances, and said, "Wow, that was a lot, the fire alarm in the lunchroom today." And I said, "Yeah, right. How inconvenient. What an inconvenient time." And she started talking to me about one of my kids, and I did not realize it was my kiddo.
Oh, no.
Eric Jones at the end of my line, leaving the lunchroom, that reached up and pulled the fire alarm. Like, no clue. So, that just describes my whole first year of teaching. Just no clue what was happening. But she was so sweet, and we talked through that. So, yeah, lots Lots of second chances as a new teacher. How about you?
I'm definitely thinking of myself as a teacher and a young teacher. I remember being put on a committee that I didn't even know what it meant. We were up for accreditation, and you know how they would come in and you'd have to do all the performances.
The dog and pony show, right?
Big one, right? Like half the school is involved in getting all of these things together. And I was put on this project and I didn't understand it. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. And so, you know what I did? Nothing. I didn't do anything. But the woman who I was with, who was probably 20 years older, 20, 25 years into her teaching career, knew exactly what to do and did it. Now, the truth is, she did not give me a second chance. My lack of engagement and not doing my part put a burden on her. And I don't think she ever forgave me for that, never looked at me differently, right? I was always that person. But my principal, which was Pam Bowden, who is as tough as they come, but also as caring and building as they come. She knew, obviously, that I had dropped the ball. And it wasn't a couple of years later, I was in charge of something big again. But then I understood my responsibilities and I knew how to prioritize, how to make sure I was getting all the things done. And so she definitely gave me a second chance, probably more often than I know. She gave me a second chance, but I remember very clearly because I was always ashamed of that failure, which I saw it as a failure. I didn't do my part. I failed. And I was always ashamed of that and had a hard time with that person I had let down. But Pam Bowden never held it against me. I was one of her people and she was going to help me grow. And she did.
Risk, to give someone a second chance. How do you think as leaders, as teachers, as coaches, we decide who should get a second chance?
I don't know. I think that's a different process for everyone. And I think for some people, it has to do with talent, right? You have too much talent for me to let you fail. I want to help you grow. And so maybe you have a greater investment with those people. But I learned the greatest lesson about second chances when Jackson was in VPK. And so Jackson, who is our nephew, and we were raising him at the time, and he was, a lot. And he would go to his class and invariable at some point in the day, he would start a mosh pit. He would be throwing things. He would do just things that embarrassed us because it was so awful that a teacher was being treated like this. But he was a baby. What was he, 4.5 years old?
He had some trauma. Like he was dealing with a lot.
He was. And you don't end up living with your aunt and uncle if your life was a smooth, lovely path. So he was dealing with a lot, but it was still so hard for me. And I know for my husband, Jason, because he likes people to be polite and respectful and everything be done the right way. And then here I am, a teacher, and my kid I'm delivering to your classroom creates a mosh pit at nap time. And she used to say to me in words and in writing, every day is a new day. Every day is a new day. And tomorrow will be a new day. And I was like, oh my gosh, if she can say that and mean it, and I watched her mean it for an entire school year.
Wow.
Then I owe everyone a second chance if I can give it, because this was a powerful difficulty that was coming into her room every single day. And she saw him with fresh eyes every day. And never once did he wonder if she loved him. He knew she loved him.
Wow. What a blessing and a powerful thing to think we don't carry over yesterday's mistakes into
Yes.
today, and we live and we learn and we move on.
Well, and that's the difference between being the teacher and being the parent too. With parenting, you have to remember yesterday's mistakes. Sometimes you have to look at that pattern of behavior so you can make some parenting adjustments. But as a teacher, you don't have to hold on to all of that. You don't have to have that list. You can meet a face with a fresh face every day. And you might make some adjustments, a seat change, a strategy change, but there's no heaviness to that because it's not about you. It's about giving that child something that they need. And sometimes I think teachers are the only ones who have the capacity to do that in a day because it's not our house. It's not our lives. It's the kid's life. And so we see them a little differently and can give that grace.
Wow. And it is grace. I mean,
Yes.
redemption is such a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if everyone had the gift of redemption as grown-ups, like the world would be a better place, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I, like you, was not an athlete in high school. I was a dancer and had a series of sponsors of the dance team, but I think that's different than a coach. I married a high school and college athlete. You married an athlete. So I hear a lot of things about coaches who were formative people in lives. And now as a college professor who goes to a lot of athletic events, see some really great coaches. And so it's interesting to think about coaches who give second chances, who see potential, and instead of just being committed to winning, are committed to the development of young people. And I have incredible respect for coaches whose priority is the development of their athletes, and not as people and not just as competitors.
I think that one of the really great things that a coach brings to a classroom, because most coaches are teachers as well, or to an administrative office as a coach, is that mindset, that growth mindset. If you want to coach me, I'm going to just eat that up and show you what I can do, rather than, be reprimanded or told, that didn't work. I need the coaching if that didn't work. If you see something not working or you see me not living up to my potential, coach me into that and I will stay with you forever. And I think that's why these athletes who we love and who we've watched grow up are so connected to those coaches, because that's an investment that those and for you and me, those were men. Those men invested in our husbands. And so that means so much to them, because the only people who have to invest in you are your parents. And when someone outside of your household decides you're worthy and I want to help you be your best you, that's golden.
Yeah. And there's so many life lessons in sports. And
yes.
The latest Ted Lasso episode, as we're recording this podcast, I think was episode 3. And at the end, Ted said something like sport is a metaphor. So much of sport is a metaphor. And I'm thinking about my son, who played a lot of different sports, but mostly golf. And I remember so many times coaches saying to him, each shot is a new shot. Like, you can't carry your frustration or your disappointment or whatever, or even your celebration from the last shot into the next shot. You play the ball where it lies, and you can get lucky off a bad shot, or you can end up in the sand off a good shot and you just play it where it lies. And I think there's so much metaphor and life represented in some of that coaching.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Especially, I love that with golf, because mostly what I know about golf, which is not a lot, is what an emotional game it is. It's such a mental game. Yes, you have to have the strokes. You have to know how to do all the things. I don't even know what the things are. You have to know the things, and you have to be really good at it. But you can psych yourself right out of winning, or right out of ever hitting the ball or meeting a par. And so that makes perfect sense. And I think same with baseball. At bat, that's a mental game in so many ways.
And you were principled early in your career by a baseball coach.
Yes, I was.
And I think he, such a great principal, probably approached so much of what he did with his teachers and his students as a coach.
You're right. And I never really think about that. But when you were saying it, I was picturing him. I used to love to watch him work a room full of teenagers or work a courtyard, because he just seemed to know everyone and care about everyone. But the way he did it was like a small game, not a big game. He wasn't talking to a crowd of 12 people. He was right here in your ear, almost like I would imagine a baseball coach would do when he's talking to his player before he goes up to bat or before he does whatever. Those few words that were so powerful, and he was magical at that. He did it with us. He did it with me. And I watched him do it with the kids. And I never thought about that as a coach thing until the very second you said it. Thank you.
That's so interesting. And we worked for, at that time, principals who were friends. Yours was clearly a baseball coach. Mine was a sailor and did some competitive sailing, but also approached things sometimes as a coach, and had such an interesting way of dealing with people. And I remember him saying, like, if you're going to show emotion, you should do that strategically. And that's such a coach.
That is
coach thing.
That is
to say, but they were such great leaders because they were at heart, I think, coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I will say, working for Joe Perez, the baseball coach and just a wonderful principal, he would come in my English classroom regularly and ask me when I would be teaching Casey at the bat so he could be sure to be there. He just, every day we got to teach Casey at the bat. That was really the only reading material necessary.
So with that, Laura, will you share, speaking of coaching, use some podcast coaching tonight. Will you share James's story about Coach Waite?
Yes. I was one of the biggest kids in my high school. The only thing bigger than my physique was my ego. I thought being a big football player allowed me to do whatever I wanted. I didn't always make good choices, and I couldn't see that I was really only hurting myself. One day at practice, I was harassing a teammate. When Coach Waite pulled me off the field to sit on the bench, I yelled inappropriately at him. I was shocked when he told me to clean out my locker and go home. The older players usually gave me a ride, and so I had to walk the 5 miles to my house. I stopped at a convenience store on the way. I sat in front of that store filled with disappointment and regret until it got dark. A car pulled up, and I recognized the driver. Coach Waite told me to get in, and he said he would drive me home. On the way to my house, Coach Waite told me what he expected. He said that I had potential and was throwing it all away. I was still benched for the next game, but I could return to practice as long as I fulfilled the expectations. I was humbled by that experience, and it made me a better person. I'm grateful to Coach Waite for believing I could change and for giving me the greatest gift, another chance.
Coach Waite. I love this story. Like, I can picture this big boy sitting outside the store, regretting the choices he made, and a car pulling up and saying,
Yes.
"Get in."
Right. I can picture it too. And we always kind of cast people we know in parts of a story. When you're reading a novel, they usually, like, your friends are playing those roles in your head. So with this story, from the first time I read it until just now, I always see my husband. He would have never yelled inappropriately at a coach because that is not who he is. But that big kid just disappointed in himself sitting at the convenience store, that's Jason in my head.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that, but I love that. Yeah. And just feeling so discouraged, and then someone pulls up and says, "All right."
Well, because behind
Here with ya.
that, like, get in, I'm going to take you home, is so much. There's forgiveness.
Yeah.
Right. Because this kid yelled inappropriately. And I'm imagining the things he probably said to his coach, and he knew he behaved badly, and he behaved badly to someone who invested in him and cared about him. So just the forgiveness in that pull up is huge.
Yeah.
There was so much going on in that moment when he brought him into the car and said, "You have potential. I believe in you. And I know that you're starting to throw it away." And then that second chance, there's so much grace in that moment.
And belief. Because when you don't believe in yourself, you just need to borrow someone else's belief in you for a bit. And that's what this coach did, was say, "All right." I think about that meme where it says, "Get in, loser." But in this case, it's like, you're not a loser. Get in. Let's turn this around.
Let's get in. Let's be a winner. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
and
funny.
You have a feeling too that Coach Waite had done this many times.
Yes.
Like, he was a pro. He knew that sending that kid home was giving him a lot of time to think.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And saying, "I don't care how good you are, how gifted you are, how big you are. That's not the way we work here."
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. And knowing that however talented he was, it wasn't going to set him up for success in the long run.
Right.
If he didn't have any self-control or respect for coaches and other players, it was something he had to sort of nip in the bud, right?
Yes. Well, and you hear a lot about that, being coachable and trying to raise kids who are coachable, who, and coaching, being coached is in a lot of different realms. And I remember this year at my first conference night this year, I was talking to a mom about her son, and I had only taught her son for 4 weeks. First conference night's a month in, but I had a very short experience with her son last year when I was covering a play practice for our drama teacher. And I saw some things going on the stage that they were not working. And so I said, "Hey, come, you two, let's talk about this." And it was Beauty and the Beast. And Belle and the monster were just not connecting, and you have to connect with that monster. So I coached them, and they tried a few things out. And at the play, I met this child for an hour and a half. And at the play, at the end, he came out on the stage when, they're greeting everyone. And he said, "Miss Estes, how did I do? Did you see?" And I told her, "Your son, though talented and very bright, is exceedingly coachable." Oh. And she was like, "Oh, thank you so much. That's just a wonderful thing to hear." And it's a high, high praise.
It is. And whatever you're trying, whatever hard thing you're trying to do, I coach principals. Like, that's a really hard role. And I feel like my job as their coach is just to be a mirror sometimes and reflect back to them. This is what you're saying. This is what you're doing. Is it working? Is this what you intended to say and do? Or to be a window and say, let's look at this big picture differently. Not to shape them into what I think they should be or tell them what I think they should do, but just sort of ask the right questions and help them think about the kind of principal they want to be. And I sort of think for James and Coach Waite, he was trying to say, is this the person you want to be?
Exactly.
Which doesn't matter if you end up playing football or in whatever profession. Is this to have someone say, is this how you want to enact this role? Is this the kind of person you want to be? Such a gift, like huge.
It is. And there are 100 ways to ask that question without asking that question. Because can you imagine if someone said to you, Julie, is this the person you want to be? You'd be like,
I'd
okay.
be so defensive. Yeah, I know. And it's funny you say that. I did talk about that with the principals I coach. I talk about it all the time about being curious and asking questions, but not asking why questions. So if you're a teacher, a why question is, why haven't you started your work? Which automatically makes you defensive. But a how or a what question is different. How can I help you get started with this? What do you need to get started with this?
Exactly.
So the kinds of questions we ask as coaches, as teachers, as people who are trying to help other humans grow is critical.
I agree. And that's what tells me Coach Waite was an expert at this and had done it many, many times, because he knew exactly how to approach this moment, how to handle this kid who was getting a little bit out of hand, sending him for a long walk, but showing up to help him so that he understood he wasn't alone, and that he understood, actually, you can't do it alone. Because it sounds like ego-wise, he might have seen himself as the the big player there.
Right. Not the teammate. It does make me wonder about the conversation in the car on the way home. I mean, we can kind of guess what it was, but it does make you curious to know more about this story. So friends, I hope you loved this redemption story as much as we do. Thank you, teachers, for giving kids second chances, for seeing their potential even when they make mistakes.
I want to say this too. As much second chance as you give a kid, you should be giving to yourself as well. We are our own worst critics. We have extremely high standards for ourselves because we understand what's at risk in our classroom every day. But you don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be perfect, which is like really lucky. And it's okay to forgive yourself and say, you know what? Tomorrow is a whole new day, and face that classroom with your fresh face and be okay with like yesterday's little flub or yesterday's mess up. You let the inner Coach Waite, bring you in.
Or as Connor's golf coach said, one shot at a time, friends. One shot at a time. Yep. Big love, teachers. Thanks for tuning in. We're so excited to bring you this podcast every Sunday. We hope it helps with your Sunday scaries and sends you into the week ahead with some hope and some efficacy and belief that you do make a difference. So if you've loved this podcast, please tell a teacher friend. Leave us a rating, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you. Have a great week.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Lessons That Last podcast. The story Laura shared today can be found on the Chalk and Chances website, along with many more stories and resources. Just visit chalkandchances.com. You can even take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. See you next Sunday for another episode of Lessons That Last.